I've found myself increasingly fascinated with the notion of balance and duality. At the end of Elden Ring, we are presented with the dual nature of a god, two beings of contrasting temperament, yet housed within a single body, Marika and Radagon. The moon and the Erdtree, life and death, silver and gold, Mogh and Morgott, Miquella and Malenia. What is the relevance of these themes? Today I will provide you with my interpretation of these, but first of all, a word from today's sponsor, Opera GX, the #1 browser for us gamers with a Z. Opera GX is armed to the teeth with a whole host of tools to enhance your gaming experience, like limiting how much RAM and CPU your browser takes up, as well as having integrated quick links to sites like Twitch and Twitter. Of course, one of the coolest things about the browser is how good it looks, and how you can adorn it with one of its many mods, such as this really cool medieval mod. It's easy to activate with one click of a button, and it gives your browser a cool animated background music, and keyboard sound effects, as well as opening and closing tab noises. What I personally really like about the mod system is that you can combine elements of different mods together to suit your preference, so I can have the aesthetics of a cyberpunk browser with the cool dragon background. Switching to Opera GX has never been easier, as you can import your bookmarks, browsing history, cookies and passwords from your previous browser with just one click. So if you want to optimize your browsing experience and even get a unique tab that shows all of my videos, then download Opera GX using my link below. Thanks again to Opera GX for sponsoring this video, and now back to the lore. Duality has long been a focus of FromSoftware games, most obviously in Dark Souls. Light and dark, chaos and death, and so I'm not pretending it is something new to FromSoftware games. Rather, I've always had this subject in the back of my mind, nagging me, as something I want to discuss because it is so prevalent with Elden Ring in particular. So many elements or forces in Elden Ring have an opposite or an inversion, whether it be the greater will and the frenzied flame, or Morgott and Mogh's contrasting ideologies about their omen condition. Each of these dualities have something interesting to share, whether it be a simple contrasting narrative device, or whether it be a deeper reference to lunar and solar archetypes and balance as a whole. We will be unpacking some of these subjects today, as well as reconciling it with the ideologies of the Golden Order fundamentalists, whose aims seem to revolve around reconciliation of all matter. Ultimately, by the end of this video, I hope to have explored the meaning behind some of these examples, and why duality is so important to Elden Ring as a whole, and the main conflicts found within its story. But before we get started guys, remember that if you like Elden Ring lore, then consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. In Dark Souls 1, in the very first cinematic, we are introduced to the ideas of duality, light and dark, heat and cold, life and death. Yet it only came with disparity, and before this there was just neutrality, a grey world of unliving stone dragons. Likewise, we hear a similar story in Elden Ring, a time of when there was only one form of life, the One Great.
All that there is came from the One Great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse.
I think it's fair to assume that in this time when life was just one, there were no dualities, and so this is our inciting cosmological event that laid the foundations for disparity. And my speculation is that because we see so much examples of duality and balance within the world of Elden Ring, is that with this disparity came a system of balance, that this world exists in a state of balance and opposing forces, an inversion of each element or a Newtonian response. Naturally, being a system of opposing forces, this can sometimes generate conflict. However, at the end of this video I will present what I believe to be the perfect harmonious balance between two twins that we find in the game. The concept of two opposing elements making a whole is such a fundamental basic to life, science and philosophy. From the double helix strands of DNA, the sun and the moon, mothers and fathers, life and death, and yin and yang. So it is no surprise that these ideas permeate mythologies across numerous cultures. In the mythology of many cultures, the moon and the sun has always been the most fundamental of dualities, both sources of light, the symbols of night and day, personified in certain mythologies to be opposing and yet symbiotic. And so with that said, I'd like to start with what I see as the most fundamental duality in Elden Ring, the moon and the Erdtree. Like in Dark Souls, the moon plays an important role within Elden Ring's mythology. However, unlike Dark Souls, where the moon is the counterpoint to the sun, instead, the opposite to the moon in Elden Ring is the Erdtree / the Elden Ring. As many have observed, the sun actually plays a very minor role within Elden Ring, to the point that it is almost not even visible within the sky. It is clear that the Erdtree plays the role of a sun symbolically in this world. Not only does it illuminate the lands, but it also once gave off heat, a fact we can learn of via the warming stone. One of the most well-known philosophies of balance is that of yin and yang, a Chinese philosophical concept that presents the world as a system of balance between opposing yet interconnected forces. Yin is the receptive or passive element, but is also represented by the moon, and generally is associated with the feminine. Conversely, yang is the active masculine aspect, represented by the sun. They are two halves of the fundamentals of the world. One even brings the night, and the other the day, the light and the shadow. These elements of yin really help explain the foundation of the moon's depiction within Souls games as a whole. The moon has very much always been associated with the feminine in Dark Souls. The Dark Moon Gwendolyn is raised as a girl, because he was born with a strong affinity to the moon. Likewise in Elden Ring, it seems to be the women of the Carian family specifically who are the inheritors of the moon's legacy. Renala makes contact with the full moon, then leads her daughter Ranni by the hand, who is introduced to her moon, the dark moon. The moon and the sun being associated with the feminine and masculine respectively isn't just an Eastern concept, however. In Roman mythology, Luna is a female, whereas Sol is a masculine figure. As for why the moon seems to be associated with sorcery in both Souls and Elden Ring, I believe it simply comes down to the fact that culturally magic is more associated with women and feminine energies. However, that being said, the moon is also associated with magic itself. Moon magic is a thing, and often occult practices revolve around lunar cycles. Finally, yin is also the passive element of the yin and yang balance. This connection is made in the game Warframe as well. In Warframe's choice system, you can either make sun decisions or moon decisions. Sun decisions are the passionate ones, whether that be acting in anger or in violence, or on the flip side, showing empathy. Whereas the moon decisions in Warframe are shown as the detached, emotionless decisions, where logic dictates the action of the player. Likewise, in Elden Ring, the Order of the Moon seems to be a detached order of logic. This is reflected in Ranni's speech if you choose the Age of Stars.
Now cometh the age of the stars, 1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon. Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all, reaching the great beyond, into fear, doubt, and loneliness, as the path stretcheth into darkness.
This is a subject we have discussed previously in my Ranni lore video. The translation is a little odd, and I would recommend that video if you'd like to see some better translations. But in essence, what Ranni is saying here is that her order will be at a great remove from Earth. It will be present in the cosmos, untouched by emotion, faith, and close contact. Her order being far away from the people that she governs, in the cold abyss of space, sounds like a very cold, logical, and passive order if I ever heard one. A yin order. Contrasted with the active order of the Erdtree, that is very direct, very present and active. It very much directly moves to impose its order upon the world, even beginning a series of violent conquests to achieve such an end. A very yang order. But this analogy also does somewhat spill into the alchemical realm. From the Black Moon worshipping Nox, we can find out that the moon is also associated with silver. from the silver tears to the silver mist that their night maidens spray from their mouths, all of which I see as analogous to Mercury, one of the 3 prime elements in alchemy. And at a stretch, we could see the gold of the Erdtree as analogous to sulfur, or the soul. In alchemy there are 3 prime materials, the neutral base matter salt, and then the 2 opposing materials we have just mentioned, sulfur and mercury. Sulfur and mercury follow some of the similar dichotomies that we've just discussed about yin and yang. Sulfur, like yang, is the active, aggressive element that is meant to represent the soul. The greatest lore item in the game, the Albinauric blood clot, shows that the Albinaurics themselves have a silver blood, and its item description highlights the fact that they are reviled by most living things in the lands between because they are artificial, reinforcing the fact that these mercury-blooded creatures are merely the material aspect of the world, and they are without soul or sulfur, because they are disconnected from the source or nexus of souls, the Erdtree. The magnum opus of alchemy is to reconcile and combine these materials into the perfect substance. One of the allegorical depictions of such a union is known as the rebus, an immortal being, the combination of the White Queen, Mercury, and the Red King, of the male and female, into one whole. The relevance of this to Elden Ring should be quite obvious, as it makes us think of Radagon being the Red King, and Marika, the White Queen. Again, these two are meant to be opposing forces, and yet in Elden Ring we find them forced into a single body. And so this alchemical analogy gives us 2 states of being. You can have 2 opposing matters in a system of balance, or you have convergence. And we will return to this topic near the end of the video when we talk about Golden Order fundamentalism. But I want to move on to the subject of twins, as we do find quite a lot of twins in Elden Ring. And twins in mythologies are often the personification of the themes of duality, shadows and contrasts, which is why religion and mythology quite often contain stories of twins, Romulus and Remus, and Castor and Pollux, just to name a few. One of the most clear and obvious examples of twins is the Omen twins, Mogh and Morgott. Both Omen, yet both represent radically different philosophies about their condition. The Omen are a fascinating subset of beings. They are aesthetically associated with the age of the Crucible, grotesque and bestial, strong in violence, and with physical forms as chaotic as the Crucible itself. Yet the real crux of the Omen condition is their souls, which have become disconnected from the Erdtree, the nexus of life in this world. The seedbed curse is a good tool to understand the Omen condition with, as these are the poxes that the Dung Eater spreads the Omen curse with. It reads the following: by doing so, he prevents dead souls returning to the Erdtree, leaving them forever cursed, one of the most loathsome things found in the lands between. These beings are cursed insomuch that their souls die but are unable to return to the Erdtree. This is why, for me, some of the powers of the Omen are comparable, visually, to those who live in death, and for clarity I'm talking about the brown-black flames that Royal Omen are able to produce, which is very visually similar to the white-black flame of Ghost Flame, a flame which sprouts from those who live in death when they begin to respawn. Remember that those who live in death are born from Godwyn, a being who died in soul only, and so in that way the Omen are very similar, both a set of beings who have dead souls. And we are beginning to see a pattern here of who the fundamentalists hate: those who live in death, the Omen, and the Albinaurics, all groups that are disconnected from the Erdtree recycling system. Ultimately, Morgott accepts the judgment of the Golden Order, believing that his Omen form to be accursed, that mars the purity of the thrones and of the Erdtree.
The thrones, stained by my curse, such shame I cannot bear. Thy part in this shall not be forgiven.
Yet his twin Mogh is the opposite. In the depths of the sewers, he rejected the condemnation of the Erdtree Order, and not only accepted his accursed blood, but learned to love it, and wear it on his sleeve, let it become his own standard for his power base. So what is the thematic role of Mogh and Morgott in their contrasting ideologies? Well, there are several facets to it. Firstly, I believe it is just a simple relationship of contrasts, two opposing brothers that highlight the damaging effects of the Golden Order dogma. Both are afflicted by it in different ways. One is gaslit into hating themselves, and the other is radicalized, forced to become exactly what the Golden Order labels them to be. But mainly, these two are just thematically harmonious with the rest of Elden Ring by bringing another set of dualities into a story that is filled with them already, reinforcing the notion that everything in this world has a shadow, everything exists in balance. But with that said, I think we talk about the elephant in the room now when we're talking about duality, and that is the Golden Order fundamentalists. The fundamentalist school of the Golden Order seems to tout convergence and regression, a focus on completeness rather than balance. This of course can be traced back to Radagon himself, whose talisman tells us that he aspires to be complete. To me, the idea of completeness again goes back to the alchemical idea of the rebus, the reconciliation and combination of all matter. Indeed, under Radagon, the fundamentalists reject a system of balance between miracles and spells. Radagon's fundamentalist prayers are a result of both intelligence and faith, neither spell nor miracle, but both. The foundational laws of the Golden Order fundamentalist further espouse these ideas, that all things are in fact linked, not in opposition, and to quote the law of regression, regression is the pool of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. I hadn't realised the full significance of these words until I began to consider Elden Ring's systems of duality. As it stands now, the world is one of opposing forces acting upon each other, creating a Newtonian system of balance. And yet sometimes the balance slips. The removal of the Rune of Death, for example, which leads the world in a deathless state. But ultimately, things eventually do rebalance. We later have the Night of the Black Knives, and the birth of those who live in death, as if to correct the imbalance that had been caused by the removal of the Rune of Death. But balance between opposing forces can be destructive sometimes, and perhaps Radagon witnessing these events around death seeks now to completely eliminate balance altogether. Instead of it being a yin and yang circle, two halves acting against each other, it is just a circle. Devon and Darian, Dee and his brother, represent a culmination of Golden Order ideals. Two beings, yet one soul. Convergence. Their armour and weapons are gold and silver combined, reminding us that their condition is symbolic of the greater themes of duality found within Elden Ring. We've already talked about gold and silver, and its relevance to yin and yang, to mercury and sulphur. And yet here we have two beings with one soul, and their armour sets showing these two materials, these two halves, as one. Their weapon, the inseparable sword, reads the following: sword forged by compounding silver and gold. The inseparable twins found solace in the Golden Order, the only institution not to revile them as accursed beings. To the Golden Order, these twins are a step towards greater convergence, the removal of balance, and oneness within the world. I have seen people try to liken the fundamentalist ideology to be similar to the Frenzied Flame and the return to the One Great. And I would argue that the real difference between these two is that the Golden Order fundamentalists don't necessarily want all life to be bundled into one form, rather that there is a uniformity amongst life and that everything is linked together in a chain of causality. As we've discussed numerous times in different videos, the law of regression makes one think of the statistical phenomena known as regression towards the mean. In essence, this refers to the idea where a sampling of variables where there are extreme outliers, if you repeat that same sampling, the results will regress closer towards the mean, towards the average. Last Protagonist describes this very aptly in his Erdtree video, in which he uses the example of two parents who are above average height. If they have a child together, that child is likely to be shorter than them and closer to the average height. So the law of regression, in the context of Elden Ring, most likely means that life in general that eternally yearns to converge will, over time, regress closer and closer to an average, again implying some sort of uniformity of form. Combining this understanding with the great themes of duality and balance within Elden Ring, we can see the Golden Order fundamentalist ideas as a transcendence to something beyond opposing forces, something that is complete, much like Radagon strive to be, and much like the true magnum opus of alchemy, the combination and reconciliation of all matter. The striving towards wholeness or completeness is also Jungian, in which a person attains wholeness by reconciling the different aspects of themselves, the ego with shadow, the anima and the animus. Except in Radagon's case, this reconciliation of both of his halves is more literal, as he does indeed share his body with his other half, with his shadow. And perhaps this gives new meaning to Marika's last words to her other half.
O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both, mine other self.
Perhaps Radagon wanted Marika and Radagon to become one being. Despite the fact they share a body, they are still distinct personalities. They are still the two materials of alchemy, as ultimately he is just one half of a whole. Yet Radagon's fundamentalist ideology, his desire for convergence, is flawed. There are things that exist outside the holistic Golden Order, such as those who live in death, and the Omen, and the Albinaurics. These cannot be reconciled, they can only be expunged. Dee even acknowledges that these beings, those who live in death, tarnish the truth of the Golden Order just by their mere existence, as they fall outside the principles and causality of Golden Order fundamentalism. They are like the remainder in a mathematic equation that doesn't quite balance. So at a very base level, this philosophy is flawed. If everything is not connected in a chain of causality, then all things do not yearn to converge. It's that simple. Those who live in death and the Omen curse will continue to exist outside those chains of causality. However, they do work in a system of balance, as they act as opposing forces to the Erdtree and those who are connected to it. The world of Elden Ring either needs to exist in a state of balance, or it needs to be completely melted away to become one material once again. And I want to move on to the final pair of twins who I believe are the best example of harmonious balance that we can find in Elden Ring, the twin prodigies. Miquella and Malenia are born of the single-bodied god, and as we learn from Malenia's remembrance, this fact was supposed to make their birth the most special of all. And perhaps Radagon had hoped that they would not be born as twins, for in a lot of ways the white-haired Miquella and the red-haired Malenia, together, are the greatest force of all. And yet they were born as twins, reflecting that parity and duality that exists throughout Elden Ring. Again, one lunar and one solar. One with white hair, one with red hair. One physical, aggressive and powerful, the other passive, reflective and intelligent. I have always believed that St. Trina is an aspect or part of Miquella, and perhaps that is reflective of the fact that he aligns more closely with the feminine aspect of yin and yang. As we learn from the triple rings of light, Radagon hoped to utilise his son's intelligence for his Golden Order fundamentalism, as Miquella is obviously a great thinker. Yet Miquella rejects the teachings of Convergence, as he only cares about one thing, his sister, and to cure her to make her life better. In fact, most of what we know about Miquella's life is dedicated to curing his sister. In return, Malenia rewards her brother's love with undying loyalty. Despite herself being an Empyrean, and one of the most powerful beings in all of the lands between, she resigns herself to be her brother's blade. While he sought a way to eliminate her curse, Malenia would shield her brother from his. Miquella, the ever-youthful, was no doubt physically feeble, and yet he now had his sister's strong arm to defend him. Mogh and Morgott's relationship was one of contrasting and opposing forces, an antagonistic relationship, at least in an ideological sense rather than a physical sense, and it was meant to better emphasise the Omen condition and the flaws of the Golden Order. Yet Miquella and Malenia actually represent the pinnacle of opposing forces in balance, because they aren't really opposing. They are symbiotic and harmonious, yet individual. In fact, the statues of Miquella and Malenia highlight their powerful bond. But not only this, it shows two beings, two halves, making up one whole. Contradictory yet cooperative, they are together a singular cosmic power that could bring balance. And together their strength disproves the need for convergence that the Golden Order fundamentalists strive for. They value the individuality of two opposing halves and are the poster children for disparity and individuality. It is just a shame that Miquella's order was never given a chance to grow, snuffed out by Mogh. Indeed, it is the fickleness of gods, no better than man, that is the fly in the ointment. But regardless of the actions of God and men, there will always be a shadow, and in the world of Elden Ring I think it holds true, that for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And that is why the world of Elden Ring is one of dualities, reflections, and shadows. So thanks guys, that is my take on Duality and Twins within Elden Ring. I know this was a little different than my usual Elden Ring videos, but I've been thinking deeply about the concepts of duality recently, and how it manifests as almost a background noise to all of Elden Ring's great events. But please let me know your thoughts below. What do you think about the themes of parity, duality, and twins within Elden Ring? And if you liked this video, please leave a like, consider subscribing, and comment below, as it really helps the channel out immensely. But until next time guys, I will see you in the streets of Leyndell. Take care and have a wonderful evening.